The email was 4 months old. A simple thing, really. Just 2 lines of text sent from an address I did not recognize at first, the name attached to it, Arthur Vance, meaning nothing to me beyond a vague association with the Community Arts Center's donor plaque. Mr. Leo, thank you for the beautiful design on the spring fundraiser flyer. It captured the spirit of the event perfectly. Best, Arthur Vance. I had read it, my heart giving a strange little kick, and then I had saved it. Not in a folder, just in the main inbox, where it was eventually buried under a landslide of freelance rejections and overdue bills. But I knew it was there, a small, solid thing in the digital chaos of my life. A quiet acknowledgement from a quiet man. My life was ordered for safety, which was another word for solitude. My small apartment was my fortress, its single window looking out onto a brick wall that offered no surprises. My work as a freelance graphic designer was a landscape of feast or famine, mostly the latter, which meant my budget was a tightrope I walked with grim precision. The Arts Center was my only luxury. I volunteered there twice a week, shelving books in the library, designing promotional materials for free, anything that got me out of my apartment and into a space that felt warm and purposeful. It was there I saw him. Arthur Vance. He was not what I expected of a millionaire, though I suppose my expectations were formed entirely by bad television. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of observation rather than stress. He dressed in simple, well-made clothes, dark trousers, soft-looking sweaters, that never announced their cost. He moved with a kind of deliberate calm, a man who had no need to rush, ever. He would come in sometimes, not for meetings in the director's office, but to look at the new student art exhibit or to sit in the library, reading for an hour. He never made a show of his presence. He was just there, a steady, quiet foundation beneath the center's cheerful, often frantic, energy. And I, from a safe distance, watched him. The annual fundraising gala was the center's biggest event, and this year, it felt bigger than ever. Our director, Brenda, was a wonderful woman with a heart full of passion and a planner full of scribbled, panicked notes. A week before the event, she stood in the middle of the main hall, hands on her hips, looking at the chaos of stacked tables, boxed decorations, and tangled strings of lights with an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. That was when the catalyst arrived, in the form of Arthur Vance walking through the doors, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Brenda, his voice low and warm. "Looks like you could use an extra set of hands," he said. It was not a question. Brenda looked like she might burst into tears of gratitude. "Arthur, you're a lifesaver, but you're a donor, a guest. You shouldn't be," he cut her off gently. "I'm a member of this community, and I know how to read a floor plan. Let me help you manage the setup. I'll be the project foreman. No pay required," he smiled. A small, subtle thing that barely touched his lips but lit his eyes. And just like that, he was part of our world. My world. I had been tasked with overseeing the decor, which meant my careful diagrams and boxes of color-coded ribbons were suddenly under the purview of this man. I felt a nervous tremor in my stomach. This was too close. My quiet observation from across the library was one thing. Working under his direct gaze was another entirely. He called a small meeting of the volunteer setup crew, which consisted of me, a retired schoolteacher named Carol, and 2 college students earning credit. He did not stand at the front like a general. He pulled a folding chair into our circle and sat with us. He had Brenda's floor plan, but he also had a clean, simplified version he had sketched himself on a large pad of paper. Everything about it was clear, logical, and calm. "Leo," he said, and the sound of my name in his mouth was so different from Brenda's cheerful shout. It was measured. He turned his head, and his eyes met mine. They were a deep, thoughtful gray, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of his gaze on me. It was not judgmental or critical. It was assessing. It was as if he were taking my measure, not as a volunteer or a designer, but as a person. The look softened almost immediately. "Your designs for the table arrangements are excellent. The color flow is very well thought out. I just have a few questions about logistics." He was asking my opinion. Not telling me how it would be, but asking. We talked about the height of the centerpieces, the way the light would hit the silk banners I had designed, the best way to hang the strings of fairy lights without them looking, in my words, like a sad college dorm room. He listened. He actually listened, nodding slowly, his focus entirely on me. The rest of the room seemed to fade away. It was just his voice, a low and steady rumble, and the quiet intensity of his attention. This was the man who had written that email. And I understood, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that my quiet fascination was not quiet at all. It was a loud, insistent yearning that had been waiting for a reason to surface. And it terrified me. The days that followed fell into a strange, new rhythm. The main hall of the arts center became a self-contained universe, smelling of dust, fresh paint, and the faint, clean scent of sandalwood that clung to Arthur's sweaters. He was there from morning until evening, a constant, grounding presence in the midst of escalating pre-gala chaos. He never raised his voice. When a problem arose, a shipment of linens was late, the wrong color of napkins arrived, he would simply pause, assess the situation with those calm gray eyes, and say, "All right, let's think." I spent most of my time on a tall, slightly wobbly ladder, hanging swathes of deep blue and silver fabric from the ceiling beams. From my perch, I had a perfect view of the entire operation, and my gaze, more often than not, drifted to him. I watched his hands. They were capable, confident hands. I saw them gently guide Carol on how to fold a complicated napkin knot, sketch a quick diagram to show the college kids how to assemble a portable stage, and hold a heavy box steady for me as I descended the ladder. They were hands that fixed things, that built things, that offered support without fanfare. He had a way of existing in a space that made it feel more solid. The frantic energy of the volunteers seemed to smooth out in his presence. He would walk the floor, not pacing, but moving with purpose, his solid footsteps a steady beat against the hardwood. Sometimes he would stand for a long moment, simply observing, his head tilted slightly. I would watch him from above, a knot of something tight and unfamiliar in my chest, and I would wonder what he was thinking. Was he seeing the placement of the tables, the angle of the lights? Or was he seeing something more? Our interactions were brief, always focused on the task at hand. "Leo, could you check the tension on that line? Do you think we need more silver on the west wall?" "That looks good, Leo." That last phrase, simple as it was, became a recurring point of internal debate for me. He would pause for a fraction of a second before saying it, his gaze analytical. In that pause, my mind would spiral. He hates it. He thinks it's amateurish. He's just being polite because he's a wealthy donor, and that's what they do. And then he would say it. "That looks good." And the warmth in his voice would be so genuine that it dismantled all my anxious architecture. I was exhausting myself, building walls, and then watching him tear them down with a few quiet words. One afternoon, I was at the very top of the ladder, trying to secure a particularly stubborn hook to a high beam. The ladder shifted, a sickening lurch to the left. I gasped, my hand scrabbling for purchase on the rough wood of the beam. Before the wobble could become a fall, a solid weight settled at the base of the ladder. I looked down. Arthur was there, both hands gripping the metal stiles, his feet planted firmly. He had crossed the entire hall in seconds, without a sound. "I've got you," he said. His voice was as calm as ever, but there was a new, deeper note in it. A protective resonance. He did not look up at me. He kept his eyes on the base of the ladder, his focus absolute. I took a shaky breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, and finished securing the hook. As I climbed down, my legs feeling like jelly, he remained there, a silent, unmovable anchor. When my feet were safely on the floor, I turned to face him, my mouth opening to stammer out a thank you. He was closer than I'd expected. I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the subtle texture of his skin. He reached out, not to my arm or shoulder, but placed his hand flat on my lower back, a gesture of pure, grounding support. "You're all right?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. The warmth of his palms seeped through my thin t-shirt, a steady, radiating heat that seemed to settle the frantic trembling in my limbs. It was not a casual touch. There was a weight to it, a significance that went beyond simple assistance. It was a touch that said, "I am here. You are safe." It lasted for a moment too long to be merely practical. And then, just as I was becoming acutely aware of my own breathing, he withdrew his hand. He did not apologize for the contact or explain it away. He just nodded, a small, affirmative gesture, and stepped back. "Maybe we should use the taller, more stable ladder for that last beam," he suggested, his tone returning to its usual measured calm. But something had shifted. The air between us was now charged with the memory of that touch. Later that day, we passed each other in the narrow corridor leading to the storage rooms. It was a tight squeeze, and our shoulders brushed. A simple, unavoidable contact. But instead of pulling away, for a split second, neither of us moved. I felt the solid muscle of his shoulder against mine, the warmth of his body. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up and met his gaze. He was looking at me with an expression I could not decipher. It was intense, questioning, and deeply gentle all at once. Then the moment broke. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and continued down the hall, leaving me standing there, the ghost of his presence tingling on my skin. The space between us was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken questions, with the memory of a steadying hand, with the silent acknowledgement of a shared, charged moment in a narrow hallway. The slow burn had found its kindling. The evening before the gala, the hall was finally quiet. The college students had left hours ago, and Carol had been sent home with a thermos of tea and strict instructions from Arthur to get some rest. It was just the two of us, moving through the transformed space like ghosts in a ballroom that waited for its guests. The fairy lights cast a soft, ethereal glow on the silver and blue fabrics. The tables were set with pristine white linens, and the centerpieces I had so carefully designed stood like silent, glittering sentinels. The air was still, holding its breath. We were doing a final walkthrough, a last check of every detail. He held a clipboard, but he rarely looked at it. His focus was on the room itself, his gaze sweeping over our week of work with a quiet satisfaction. I walked beside him, my hands shoved in my pockets, feeling a strange mix of pride and melancholy. The project was over. Tomorrow, this room would be filled with people, with noise and laughter. Our quiet, shared purpose would dissolve. The thought left a hollow ache in my chest. "There's just one more thing," he said, his voice soft in the cavernous room. He pointed toward the stage. One of the large, potted ferns that was meant to frame the podium was slightly off-center. It was a heavy thing, set in a massive ceramic pot. "It's bothering me," he admitted, a faint hint of a smile in his voice. "My architect's eye for symmetry is a curse. We can move it," I said immediately, grateful for one last task, one final reason to be here with him. He nodded. Together, we approached the fern from opposite sides. "On three," he instructed. "Ready? 1, 2, 3. Lift." We grunted with the effort, the pot heavier than it looked. We had to coordinate our movements, a shuffle step to the right, a slight pivot. For a few moments, all that existed was the shared strain, the unspoken communication of our bodies working in tandem. Lift, shift, lower. Our movements found a rhythm, a clumsy dance of cooperation. When we finally set it down in the correct position, we were both breathing a little heavily. We stood on either side of the plant, looking at each other over the green fronds. In that moment, the vast difference in our lives, his wealth, my financial precarity, his settled confidence, my anxious uncertainty, seemed to vanish. We were just two men who had moved a heavy object together. We were equals. A team. "Perfect," he breathed, his eyes not on the fern, but on me. He walked around the plant and stood before me, closer than he had been all week, save for the moment with the ladder. The space between us was intimate, charged with the shared exertion and the profound quiet of the hall. He looked around the room, at the soft lights and draped fabrics. I saw a flicker of something in his expression, a shadow of an emotion I could not name. It looked like vulnerability. He finally spoke, his voice lower than I had ever heard it, almost a whisper. "I worry sometimes," he began, his gaze dropping to the floor for a second before rising to meet mine again. "I worry that people, that they see the money, not the man. That my help feels like an order, or my presence feels like an inspection." He paused, and the silence stretched, filled with a raw honesty that made my own breath catch. "I know there's a difference in our situations, Leo," he said it so plainly, without any hint of condescension or pity. It was a simple statement of fact. "It's important to me that you never feel pressured, that you always feel you have a choice." He searched my face, and his eyes were so open, so incredibly sincere. "I hope my being here this week, I hope it hasn't felt that way to you." It was an open door. He was not just a stoic protector or a wealthy benefactor. He was a man, with insecurities and a deep-seated desire to be seen for who he was. He was giving me permission to see him, and in doing so, he was acknowledging that he saw me, too. He saw the power imbalance, and instead of ignoring it or leveraging it, he was naming it, gently defusing it, and handing the power back to me. My throat felt tight. All the anxieties I had harbored, the fears of being a project or a charity case, felt suddenly foolish in the face of his quiet, profound decency. I found my voice, though it came out raspy. "No," I said. "It hasn't felt that way at all." I held his gaze, wanting him to understand. "It's felt like you were just here, helping. It's been—" I fumbled for the right word. "Nice." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes and making them shine in the soft light. "Good," he said, the single word filled with a universe of relief. "That's very good to hear." He did not move away. He just stood there, smiling that small, real smile, and I felt something inside me, a long-locked door, creak open just a little wider. The night of the gala was a whirlwind of sound and color, a stark contrast to the peaceful quiet of the setup. The hall I knew as a workspace was now filled with strangers in glittering dresses and dark suits, their laughter and chatter echoing off the beams I had so carefully decorated. I was not a guest. I had volunteered for the cleanup crew, a role that allowed me to be present without having to perform the social dance I was so bad at. It gave me a legitimate reason to linger in the background, to watch. And I watched him. Arthur was in his element, yet separate from it. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit that made him look distinguished and solid, a rock in a sea of champagne flutes and superficial conversations. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, nodding to people, shaking hands, accepting thanks for his generous donations. But his eyes were restless. I saw them scanning the room, and more than once, I felt them land on me, a brief, grounding connection across the crowded space before he was pulled back into another conversation. I was clearing plates from a table near the back when it happened. A man with a florid face and a booming voice, clearly having enjoyed the open bar, cornered me. He held out his empty glass. "Another scotch, son. And be quick about it." He had mistaken me for one of the hired catering staff. It was an easy mistake. I was wearing simple black pants and a white shirt, but his tone was laced with an impatient, dismissive entitlement that made my skin prickle. Before I could formulate a polite correction, a calm voice spoke from just behind me. "I believe the bar is over there, and the staff are wearing black vests, Arthur." He had materialized at my side, his presence an instantaneous shield. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a light but firm touch that anchored me. The booming man blinked, his eyes focusing on Arthur, and his demeanor shifted instantly. Recognition dawned. "Vance, good to see you. Didn't realize this one was with you." He gestured vaguely at me. Arthur's hand did not leave my shoulder. His grip was steady, protective. "Leo is the heart of our design team," he said, his voice level and cool, leaving no room for argument. "The place looks wonderful tonight because of him." He looked from the man back to me, and in his eyes, I saw a flash of cold anger directed not at me, but at the man who had dismissed me. He had not just corrected the man. He had publicly validated me, elevated me. He had claimed me, not as a possession, but as someone worthy of respect. The man mumbled an apology and retreated toward the bar. The moment he was gone, Arthur's posture relaxed. He turned to me, his hand sliding from my shoulder down my back in a slow, reassuring stroke. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and for my ears only. I could only nod, my throat thick with an emotion I could not name. It was gratitude, but it was more than that. It was the feeling of being seen, of being championed, of being cared for. He had stepped out of his role as a wealthy guest and into the role of my protector, and the act was so blatant, so unambiguous. It made the air between us crackle. The silence was no longer tenable. Something had to give. Hours later, the guests had departed, leaving behind a battlefield of crumpled napkins, abandoned glasses, and the lingering scent of perfume. The cleanup crew, a mix of volunteers and hired staff, moved through the room with weary efficiency. The main task was stripping the tables, piling the rented china into crates, and folding the heavy, banquet-sized linen tablecloths. It was a two-person job, the folding. You had to walk toward each other, gathering the fabric, folding it in half, then in half again, a strange, formal dance of tidying up. I was working with Carol, her chatter a cheerful, tired hum. We finished one table, and I turned to start on the next, and found Arthur standing there. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, looking just as he had all week. He simply held up one end of the tablecloth. An invitation. Carol, with a knowing little smile, discreetly moved to another table with one of the students. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I took my end of the heavy white cloth. We walked toward each other, the fabric pooling on the floor between us. We folded at once. Then again, our hands were close, brushing occasionally. The noise of the cleanup crew, the clatter of plates, the scraping of chairs, seemed to recede, creating a bubble of silence around us. We came together for the final fold, our bodies just inches apart, the folded square of linen held between us. He did not let go. His fingers were curled around his end of the cloth, mine around my own. He looked at me, his gray eyes dark and serious in the dimming light of the hall. A small, tentative smile touched his lips. With a slow, deliberate movement, he lifted his end of the tablecloth and gently draped it over my shoulder, then his own. It formed a small, white tent, a soft curtain that separated us from the rest of the room. We were hidden in plain sight. Our curtain, he whispered, his voice a low vibration that I felt more than heard. The air inside our small linen world was warm and still, filled with the scent of clean laundry and the faint, lingering sandalwood of his skin. He was asking a question. He was creating a space and asking if I was willing to stay in it with him. My breath hitched. This was the loaded moment, the culmination of a week of shared glances, lingering touches, and unspoken feelings. This was the confrontation, not of anger, but of truth. And the choice was mine. Under the soft weight of the tablecloth, the world went quiet. The distant clatter of the cleanup crew faded into a dull, meaningless hum. All that existed was the small, intimate space Arthur had created for us. His face was only a foot from mine, illuminated by the soft light filtering through the white linen. I could see the fatigue and the hope warring in his eyes. He was not a millionaire donor or a stoic protector in that moment. He was just a man, offering a piece of his heart and waiting to see if I would accept it. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild rhythm of fear and a desperate, soaring hope. All my insecurities, all my anxieties about our differences, rose up, a chorus of cautionary whispers. But they were drowned out by the simple, undeniable truth of the man in front of me. His steadiness, his kindness, the way he had shielded me, not just from a falling ladder, but from the casual cruelty of a stranger. He had never once made me feel small. He had only ever made me feel seen. I had to speak. The silence was stretched so taut between us it felt like it might snap. I moistened my lips, and the words came out, barely a whisper, but they felt like the loudest thing I had ever said. I think. I started, my voice trembling slightly. I took a breath and met his gaze, holding it. I've been hoping for this. The confession hung in the warm air between us, simple and honest, and utterly terrifying. A wave of relief washed over Arthur's features, so profound it was like watching the sun rise on his face. The tension in his shoulders eased, and the last of his carefully maintained composure seemed to melt away, replaced by a soft, unguarded tenderness. I have too, Leo, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. For a very long time, he reached up, his hand gently touching my cheek, his thumb stroking the line of my jaw. But I needed to be sure. I needed you to feel safe enough to choose it, without any obligation. He was naming the power dynamic one last time, assuring me, even now, that my agency was paramount. He gently lifted the tablecloth from our shoulders, letting it fall onto a nearby stack of folded linens. The light of the hall rushed back in, but it no longer felt harsh or exposing. The bubble of intimacy had not burst. It had simply expanded to encompass the world around us. He did not move away. His hand was still on my cheek, a warm, grounding presence. His eyes searched mine, asking a final, silent question. I leaned into his touch. A small, simple movement, but it was everything. It was my answer. It was my consent. It was me, stepping forward, choosing this. A beautiful, slow smile bloomed on his face. He leaned in, and his lips met mine. It was not a kiss of frantic passion or pin-up demand. It was a kiss of arrival. It was gentle, sure, and breathtakingly tender. It tasted of relief and recognition, of two solitary souls finally finding their counterpart. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. It was unhurried and unmistakably mutual, a quiet conversation where no words were needed. It was right, utterly and completely right. When we finally parted, it was only by an inch. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closing for a moment. I could feel his breath, warm and steady, on my lips. His hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, his fingers lacing into my hair. I reached up and my fingers found his, lacing together between us, our grips equally firm, equally gentle. We stood there for a long time, in the center of the quiet, messy hall, breathing the same air. A silent promise, a quiet foundation, settling deep into the earth, strong and sure. I woke the next morning in my own bed, in my own small, quiet apartment. The pale morning light filtered through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, the events of the previous night felt like a dream, a beautiful, impossible fantasy conjured from fairy lights and fatigue. The memory of Arthur's kiss, the feeling of his forehead against mine, was so vivid, yet it felt fragile, like it could shatter if I examined it too closely. A familiar unease began to creep in, the cold shadow of my old anxieties. He was Arthur Vance. I was just me. Last night was a moment out of time, a gall-induced spell. What happened now, in the harsh light of a normal day? The imbalance between us felt like a chasm again. Would people talk? Would I become known at the center as the benefactor's pet project? Would I become dependent on him? The fear was a cold knot in my stomach. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it with a sense of dread, my thumb hovering over the screen. It was a text from him. My heart hammered. The message was simple, just 2 words. Coffee. It was not a demand or a summons. It was a question, an invitation. It was calm and practical, and it cut through a little of my spiraling panic. I took a deep breath and typed back a single word. Yes. We met at a small, quiet cafe on the far side of town, a place I had never been to, where no one from the center would see us. It was a deliberate choice on his part, I realized, and I was grateful for it. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table in the corner, a book open in front of him. He looked up as I approached, and the warm, gentle smile he gave me was so real, so grounded. It chased away the last of the dreamlike quality of the night before. This was real. He was real. He stood as I reached the table, a small, courteous gesture that felt both old-fashioned and incredibly respectful. He was just Arthur, dressed in a simple dark sweater and jeans, looking steady and calm. There was no awkwardness, no possessiveness in his demeanor. He simply looked happy to see me. "I'm glad you came," he said as we sat down. The conversation at first was light. We talked about the gala, about how tired we both were, about the surprisingly good quality of the catering. But beneath the surface, I knew my anxieties were simmering. He must have sensed it, because after the waitress brought our coffee, he leaned forward slightly, his expression turning more serious. He placed his hand on the table, palm up, an offering. "Leo," he said, his voice soft but direct. "I want to be very clear about something." I held my breath. What happened last night was important to me, and I want to see where this goes. But I also understand that our situations are different. He did not shy away from it. My involvement at the center is and will remain separate. Your work there is yours. You earned that respect on your own merit, long before I ever stepped in to help. This, he gestured to the space between us, is ours. It will have its own space, its own life. I will never compromise your independence. His words were a balm on my raw nerves. He had seen my fears without me having to speak them. He understood. He was actively working to dismantle the power imbalance, to create a space for us that was safe and equal. I slowly reached out and placed my hand on his. His fingers closed around mine, his grip warm and reassuring. The knot in my stomach finally, truly, began to dissolve. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. A few days later, I was back at the center, helping with the final bits of gala teardown. The hall was almost back to normal, though the air still seemed to hold a faint echo of the magic. I was stacking folding chairs when Brenda, the director, came bustling over, her face alight with cheerful curiosity. "Well, hello you," she chirped. "I have to say, I saw you getting cozy with our big benefactor during cleanup the other night." She gave me a playful, conspiratorial wink. A hot flush crept up my neck. My mind went blank. This was it. The gossip. The test. I fumbled for a response, my old habit of retreating in the face of social pressure kicking in hard. I was about to stammer some kind of denial when a familiar, calm voice spoke from just behind me. Leo was kind enough to help me with the last of the tablecloths. It's a tedious job for one person. Arthur had walked in, holding a box of files for Brenda. He delivered the lines so smoothly, so matter-of-factly, that it stripped all the romantic speculation from Brenda's comment. He then added, looking directly at me with a soft warmth in his eyes, "He has a generous spirit." It was a public deflection that was also a private compliment. It protected us without lying, and it affirmed me at the same time. He gave my shoulder a brief, friendly squeeze as he passed by to give the box to Brenda, and in that fleeting contact, a whole conversation passed between us. "I'm here. We're a team. We'll handle this together." Brenda, her curiosity satisfied with the simple, logical explanation, immediately launched into a story about a missing invoice. The moment had passed. We had navigated it, together. I went back to stacking chairs, a small, secret smile on my face. A week after the gala, Arthur invited me to his home for dinner. I had been nervous all day, imagining some sprawling, sterile mansion. But his house, while large and clearly expensive, was anything but. It was nestled in a grove of old oak trees, built of warm stone and dark wood. Inside, it was filled with books, piles of them, stacks of them, shelves overflowing with them. Art covered the walls, not showy, famous pieces, but paintings and sculptures that felt personal, chosen with love. The entire place felt like him, solid, thoughtful, and deeply comfortable. We did not have a grand, formal meal. He cooked a simple, delicious pasta, and we ate in the kitchen, talking easily. After dinner, we sat in his study, surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper and leather. It was there we had the conversation. He sat across from me, not in a large, intimidating chair, but on a comfortable ottoman, so we were at eye level. "I want to build something with you, Leo," he said, his voice quiet but sure. "Something real, and I want to do it right. Slowly, with care." He was not making grand declarations of love. He was making a statement of intent. It was practical, it was grounded, and it was exactly what I needed to hear. "There are no expectations here," he continued. "Only invitations." He stood and retrieved something from his desk. It was a single, old-fashioned brass key. He came back and held it out to me. "This isn't a key to the house," he explained, seeing the flicker of alarm in my eyes. "Not yet, anyway. This is to the studio." He gestured toward a separate, smaller building I had noticed on the property. "It was my wife's. She was a painter. It has the most wonderful light. It's been empty for a long time." His voice grew softer. "I know you work from your small apartment. I thought, maybe you'd like a quiet place to work sometimes. A place with more space to think." He placed the key in my palm. It was heavy and cool. This was not a gift of dependency. It was a gift of freedom. He was not trying to move me into his life. He was creating a space for my life to flourish alongside his. "Come and go as you please," he said. "No need to even tell me you're here. Just a quiet place for you. No strings attached." I closed my hand around the key, the metal warming against my skin. It felt like an anchor. It felt like trust. It was the most conscious, respectful choice I had ever been offered. And I accepted. A few days later, on a bright, crisp afternoon, I used the key. I walked up the stone path to the studio, my heart a gentle, steady rhythm in my chest. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The studio was one large room, with a soaring ceiling and a huge north-facing window that flooded the space with clean, beautiful light. It smelled of turpentine and linseed oil, a ghostly, creative scent. A sturdy easel stood in the corner, draped in a white cloth. It was a peaceful, sacred space. I set up my laptop on a large wooden work table, and for the first time in years, I felt my creative mind truly relax. There was no pressure here, no feeling of being in someone else's way. I worked for hours, losing myself in a design project, the silence broken only by the sound of birds outside the window. It felt less like I was in Arthur's home and more like I was in a place that was mine, a sanctuary he had simply unlocked for me. Late in the afternoon, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Arthur, holding 2 mugs. "I thought you might like some tea," he said, his smile gentle. He did not come in to inspect my work or to crowd my space. He just handed me the mug, and we went to sit on the small stone porch attached to the studio. We did not talk much. We sat in companionable silence, sipping our tea, and watched as the afternoon sun slanted through the oak trees, painting long golden stripes on the grass. The air was cool and clean. It was not a dramatic, cinematic moment. It was quiet. It was domestic. It was an intimacy built not on grand gestures, but on shared silence and a simple cup of tea. It felt more real, more lasting, than any passionate declaration. This, I thought, as I felt the steady warmth of his shoulder next to mine. This feels like arriving. As I sat there on the porch of the studio, the heavy brass key in my pocket, I thought about the man I had been just a few weeks ago. The cautious, isolated person who watched the world from a safe distance, who saved a polite email because it was the closest thing to warmth he had allowed himself to feel. That person felt like a stranger now, or perhaps a younger brother I looked back on with a gentle sort of pity. The fear had not vanished entirely. It was a part of my history, a scar I would always carry. But it no longer had control. The weight of Arthur's gaze, which I had once found so intimidating, now felt like a comforting gravity, holding me in a safe and steady orbit. The difference in our ages, the chasm of our financial situations, those things were still facts. But they were no longer the defining elements of our story. They had become context, not a cage. Arthur's wealth had not bought my affection. It had, in his careful and ethical hands, simply created the safety and space for me to find my own way to him. His resources had cleared the path, but he had waited for me to walk it myself. He had never tried to fix my life. He had simply opened a door to a quiet room and trusted me to find my own inspiration there. He had never tried to erase my insecurities. He had simply offered his own steadiness as a place for me to rest when I grew tired of fighting them. He had treated me as an equal from the very beginning, not by pretending our circumstances were the same, but by respecting my mind, my talent, and my choices with unwavering sincerity. I looked over at him. He was watching the last sliver of the sun disappear behind the trees, a peaceful, contented expression on his face. He must have felt my eyes on him, because he turned his head and met my gaze. He smiled that slow, soft smile that I was coming to know so well, the one that made the lines around his eyes crinkle and filled them with a light that was all for me. In that look, I saw our future. Not a dramatic, whirlwind romance, but a long series of quiet moments like this. Making coffee in the morning, reading side by side in his library, working in our separate, respected spaces, and coming together at the end of the day to watch the sunset. It was a partnership, one built on a foundation of mutual respect, gentle care, and the profound relief of being truly seen. I was no longer just yearning. I was home. He reached over, his hand finding mine, our fingers lacing together in that familiar, perfect way. His hand was warm, capable, and steady. And for the first time, I realized with a sense of quiet wonder, so was mine. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.